Imagine you're 25 feet below the ocean's surface. The water around you is dark blue and cold. The only sound you hear is your own air bubbles rising. Then, in the dim light ahead, something appears. Not just any rock. There are steps, platforms, right angles. A structure rising 90 feet from the seafloor with vertical walls, parallel terraces, and surfaces so flat they look like they were machine-cut. You're in Yonaguni, Japan, and what you're looking at is between 10,000 and 12,000 years old. And that's exactly where the story starts to get interesting. Welcome, explorer! Today we're going to unravel together one of the greatest mysteries in human history. 6 impossible ancient places nobody can explain. 6 mysteries. 6 places with ancient structures so precise, so colossal, and so inexplicable that they challenge everything we thought we knew about the civilizations that came before us. And this is where our adventure in search of answers begins. Come with me. Let's explore. Yonaguni, Japan. In 1986, a diver named Kihachiro Aratake was exploring the waters near the island of Yonaguni, Japan's westernmost island, when he noticed something strange on the ocean floor. He wasn't searching for history. He was looking for sharks. What he found instead was a stone formation approximately 490 feet long, 130 feet wide, and nearly 90 feet tall, rising from the ocean floor in a series of terraces and platforms with angles that seemed impossible for nature to produce. Word spread. Researchers dove in, and the world split into 2 camps that, to this day, have never reached an agreement. Professor Masaki Kimura, from the University of the Ryukyus, spent over 15 years diving and mapping the site. He documented what he described as a twin gate, a stage area with vertical walls, a feature with a silhouette resembling a turtle, with what appeared to be a sculpted head, and a series of perfectly round holes on the horizontal surfaces of the rocks. Perfectly circular holes, clustered in patterns. The kind of thing that natural rock fracturing simply does not produce, because natural fractures don't create straight lines, let alone perfect circles in sequence. Kimura also identified what appeared to be a megalithic road at the base of the structure, made up of uniformly sized blocks arranged in a linear formation. All of this sitting 80 feet underwater, preserved by the ocean for millennia. But here's the detail no one can ignore. Sea levels in the Yonaguni region were low enough to expose this area between 10,000 and 8,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, when glaciers melted and the world's oceans rose roughly 400 feet. That means, if this structure is man-made, it was built by people who lived before any civilization we know of. Before Egypt, before Stonehenge, before the wheel. Geologist Robert Schoch, who gained fame for challenging the age of Egypt's Sphinx, dove the site in 1997 and reached a conclusion that satisfied neither side. The main structure, he said, is most likely natural, shaped by the local sandstone's fracture patterns. But he also acknowledged signs of human modification. Not a construction, in his view, but a natural formation that people worked and shaped. And that small distinction changes everything. The Japanese government has never classified Yonaguni as an archaeological site. That means there's no legal protection, no funded systematic excavation, no official investigation currently underway. The debate continues in an institutional vacuum, settled not by evidence, but by the absence of inquiry. 40 years after Aratake's discovery, the circular holes documented by Kimura remain unexplained. The road at the base of the structure has never been excavated. And the simplest question of all, who was here 10,000 years ago, and what did they know, still has no answer. The ocean holds that secret just 80 feet below the surface, waiting for someone to finally decide to go down there and take a proper look. And speaking of hidden secrets, the next place we're visiting isn't underwater. It's underground, hidden for decades inside a hillside in China, where 36 cathedral-sized caverns were discovered without anyone knowing they existed. The Longyou Caves, China. In June of 1992, a farmer named Wu Anai decided to do something no one had ever attempted before: drain a lake. The lake sat near his village in China's Zhejiang province, and the locals had always called it the unfriendly lake, because it never dried up, never flooded, and never produced a single fish. Wu Anai switched on a pump. 17 days later, when the water had finally dropped low enough, the bottom of the lake wasn't there. In its place was the entrance to a massive, dark cavern, covered from floor to ceiling in chisel marks arranged in a perfect crosshatch pattern, each line exactly 1 centimeter from the next. Wu Anai drained another lake, found another cavern, kept draining, found 36. What archaeologists from the Zhejiang Province Cultural Relics Bureau discovered when they arrived on site was something that fit no known category. The 5 excavated caverns, out of a total of 36, cover a combined area of roughly 320,000 square feet, with ceilings reaching up to 100 feet high in the larger chambers. But what struck researchers most wasn't the size, it was the finish. Every surface of every cavern, the floor, the walls, and the ceiling, was covered in the same pattern of chisel marks in perpendicular bands, identical to one another, applied with a regularity that seemed almost mechanical. Interior columns had been deliberately left in place to support the ceiling, positioned with clear and intentional structural logic. A structural engineering professor at Zhejiang University examined the column placement and stated that it followed load distribution principles consistent with intentional structural engineering, not a stone extraction operation that simply happened to avoid cutting each column by accident. All 5 excavated caverns share the same 50-degree ceiling angle and the same column placement pattern, suggesting that a single unified architectural plan was applied across 5 separate work sites, possibly worked simultaneously. Think about that for a moment. 5 different spaces, carved out of solid rock, all following the same technical specifications, all bearing the same decorative, or functional, surface finish. Someone designed this, someone specified that pattern, and someone inspected the results. Here's the problem that no conventional explanation fully resolves. Chinese written records span more than 3,000 years of continuous, documented history. Imperial China was meticulous about recording major public works. The Great Wall is in the texts. The Grand Canal is in the texts. The Emperor's funerary complex in Xi'an is in the texts. 36 cathedral-sized caverns carved into an entire hillside in Zhejiang province, representing the removal of hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of rock, appear in no text, from no dynasty, from no period whatsoever. No construction tools were found inside. No organic material suitable for carbon dating was recovered. No artifacts of any kind. No personal objects. No incidental traces of human occupation have been identified in any of the 36 chambers. Conventional archaeology offers the stone quarrying explanation. The caverns were excavated to extract siltstone as a building material, the rubble was hauled off to other construction sites, and their absence from the historical record simply reflects the industrial, unglamorous nature of the project. But the chisel pattern is what unravels that explanation. Stone quarrying optimizes for speed, not aesthetics. It leaves irregular surfaces shaped by the natural weak points in the rock. The Longyou pattern, identical across 36 separate caverns, is not irregular. It is a specification. Someone required that pattern. Someone verified it was correctly applied, and that someone left no name, no mark, no tools behind. The caverns were sealed. Lakes formed above them. And for nearly 2,000 years, they stayed perfectly hidden, waiting for a curious farmer and a water pump. If the Longyou caves hide a mystery of scale, the next place we're visiting carries a mystery of weight, literally, where stones larger than anything we can move today were fitted together with a precision that would put a modern engineer to shame. Sacsayhuaman, Peru. You're at 12,100 feet above sea level in the Peruvian Andes, and the air is so thin that every step feels like a struggle. Before you, a wall stretches 1,180 feet along a hillside, zigzagging in 3 massive rows of stone, each one set back from the one below in a pattern that distributes weight like interlocking fingers. The stones in front of you are irregular. No two are the same shape. Yet they fit together with such staggering precision that if you try to slide a piece of paper into the joint between 2 blocks, you can't. It won't go through. Now look at the block closest to you. It weighs approximately 125 tons. That's heavier than 80 cars. And someone brought it here from a quarry 14 miles away, across mountain terrain, without wheels, without steel, without machinery. Welcome to Sacsayhuaman. The construction is attributed to the Inca Empire, primarily to the Emperor Pachacuti, who ruled from 1438 to 1471 AD. The academic consensus holds that a workforce of up to 20,000 people, operating over several decades through the Inca labor tribute system known as the Mita, was responsible for the work. Archaeologist Jean-Pierre Protzen from UC Berkeley conducted hands-on experiments at the site in the 1980s, extracting and shaping stones with bronze tools, and demonstrating that the polygonal fitting technique was achievable through patient measurement and trial-and-error cutting. The largest block Protzen tested weighed roughly 2 tons. The largest block at Sacsayhuaman weighs 125. This is where physics starts asking questions that bronze tools can't answer. Friction scales with mass. Engineering margins of error collapse as weight increases. Moving a 2-ton stone with levers and ropes is demonstrably possible. We have evidence of that. Moving a 125-ton stone across 14 miles of mountain terrain, hoisting it to the correct height, and then fitting it to within half a millimeter against a uniquely shaped neighbor it has never touched before, that is a sequence of operations for which no ancient engineering model has been fully demonstrated at that scale. And there's another detail that engineers notice, but rarely makes it into travel guides. Some blocks have small protrusions on their surface, knobs that jut out from the stone, which some researchers interpret as anchor points for a hoisting system that was never fully removed after the blocks were set in place. In 1950, an earthquake struck Cusco with enough force to collapse buildings throughout the colonial city the Spanish had built at the foot of the mountain. The Spanish buildings, constructed with cut stone and mortar in the European tradition, cracked and fell. The walls of Sacsayhuaman, high up on the hill, ancient and mortarless, held. Engineers who examined the walls afterward noted that the irregular polygonal joints had distributed the seismic force through the stone, with each block shifting subtly and then resettling against its neighbor's face. They moved, and they survived exactly as they were. That is not a construction accident. It is the result of a deep understanding of how force travels through stone, an understanding that someone applied to 125-ton blocks more than 500 years ago. Spanish chronicler Pedro de Cieza de León visited Cusco in 1553 and spoke with Inca informants who told him that Sacsayhuaman had been built before the Incas by a race of giants and through the power of Viracocha, their creator god. Even the Inca rulers themselves, he wrote, expressed awe at the stones, describing them as having been moved by magic. Conventional archaeology attributes this to mythologizing, a common human tendency to assign supernatural origins to works of unusual scale. But it's hard to ignore that the very people who supposedly built the place pointed upward and said, "It wasn't us." The wall held when the modern city crumbled around it. Whatever knowledge was used to build it, that knowledge worked. And if 125-ton stones fitted together in the Andes already seem impossible, wait until you see what was drawn in the Peruvian desert just below. Figures so large, they only make sense when seen from the sky, and so perfect that to this day no one can fully explain how they were made without ever leaving the ground. Nazca lines, Peru. You're lying on the ground, pressing your face against the dry, yellowish earth of a Peruvian desert where it hasn't rained in centuries. The sun burns the back of your neck. In front of you, a shallow trench, maybe 6 inches deep and 1.5 feet wide, where someone carefully removed reddish surface stones to expose the lighter soil beneath. From down here, it looks like nothing. A path, maybe. A scratch in the ground. You'd walk right past it without a second thought. Now imagine climbing 1,000 to 1,300 feet straight up, and suddenly that scratch transforms. The path becomes a wing, then a beak, then a precise, curling tail. And below you, with a wingspan of 315 feet, a hummingbird hovers frozen over the desert. Its proportions are so exact you can identify the species. Its symmetry is so perfect you'd assume it was drawn from above. You are above. The people who drew it were not. The Nazca lines were first documented from the air in 1927 by Peruvian archaeologist Toribio Mejia Zespe, although locals had been walking among them for centuries without understanding what they were part of. It took altitude to reveal the image. American historian Paul Kosok flew over the plateau in 1939 and noticed that one of the long straight lines aligned precisely with the sunset on the winter solstice. He called it the largest astronomy book in the world. German mathematician Maria Reiche heard that description and devoted the next 50 years of her life to the lines, sleeping on the plateau, mapping them by hand, and protecting them from encroachment until her death in 1998. She proposed the most enduring theory. The Nazca lines were an astronomical calendar, a celestial map drawn on the Earth. A beautiful idea that an astronomer named Gerald Hawkins dismantled with math. Hawkins, who had cracked the astronomical code of Stonehenge, turned his analysis toward the Nazca lines and found something that completely deflated Reiche's theory. The percentage of lines that aligned with significant astronomical events was no greater than chance. The lines were most likely not a calendar, which left the question of purpose wide open. The recognizable figures total around 70 biomorphs, including the famous spider, condor, whale, coiled-tailed monkey, and that hummingbird. Alongside them, the plateau holds approximately 800 straight lines and 300 geometric figures, trapezoids, triangles, and spirals, covering an area of roughly 175 square miles. Carbon dating of wooden stakes found at line intersections has consistently returned dates between 500 BC and 500 AD, placing their creation within the region's Nazca culture. But it's the straight lines, not the animal figures, that present the harder engineering problem. Individual lines stretch up to 30 miles across terrain that is not flat. The Nazca Plateau rises and falls, crosses gullies and hills, and changes elevation along its length. And the lines don't waver. They don't accumulate error the way a surveyor's chain does over long distances. They hold their compass bearing across all 30 miles with a consistency that modern surveyors describe as remarkable. Researchers Joe Nickel and John Fisher showed that small teams using only wooden stakes and rope could reproduce Nazca-style geometric figures using a grid scaling method. Their experiment was real and important, but their largest successful replication was about 300 feet. The longest Nazca line is 30 miles. In 1975, artist Jim Woodman and balloonist Julian Knott built a hot air balloon using only materials available to the ancient Nazca people, a reed gondola and a cotton envelope, and achieved a sustained flight over the plateau. The flight was real. The implication was clear but unproven. The Nazca people may have had access to an aerial vantage point to design and verify what they were creating on the ground below. No evidence of balloon technology has ever been found at the site. And in 2019, Yamagata University in Japan, working with AI-assisted analysis of drone imagery, identified 143 new geoglyphs at Nazca, ones that had been invisible to ground surveys and overlooked for 80 years of aerial study. The full picture is still not complete, and someone, 2,000 years ago, managed to hold that entire picture in their mind without ever leaving the ground. If that's already unsettling, the next place we're visiting will show you that some ancient peoples didn't just look up. They went in the opposite direction entirely, digging 280 feet below the surface to build an entire city underground. The underground city of Derinkuyu, Turkey. In 1963, a man in the town of Derinkuyu, in the Cappadocia region of central Turkey, knocked down a wall in his basement during a renovation and found a room. Behind that room was another room. Behind that was a tunnel sloping gently downward. He followed it. The tunnel kept descending through volcanic tuff, the soft rock left behind by ancient eruptions, carved and shaped into corridors, chambers, stairways, and shafts, going down floor by floor, until, 280 feet below the surface, the tunnel finally stopped. 280 feet. That's the height of a 28-story building, dug downward into rock by people who had no excavators, no dynamite, and no hardened metal tools. And what they built down there wasn't a cave. It was a city. Turkey's Department of Antiquities launched a formal investigation and opened the site to tourism in 1969. What they found was a multi-level urban environment with distinct functional areas spread across at least 18 floors. On the upper levels, where the air would be freshest, there were stables. The body heat from the animals helped warm the floors above. A design detail that was no accident. It was engineering. There were wine cellars, their walls still marked by traces of fermentation. There were communal kitchens, classrooms, and, on the deepest levels, churches with carved apses, used by early Christian communities fleeing Roman and, later, Arab persecution. There were wells reaching the water table, and there was a ventilation system with more than 50 individual air shafts, some extending the full 280 feet from the lowest level all the way to the surface. That ventilation system is what puzzles modern engineers. It isn't the ventilation of a mine cut wherever convenient. It is the ventilation of a building designed by someone who understood fluid dynamics and applied that understanding to an 18-story, three-dimensional underground structure. The shafts were positioned and sized to create passive airflow through natural convection. air movement driven by temperature differences between the cool subsurface and the warmer surface above. It works. Today, more than 1,000 years after it was built, every room in that city still breathes. And then there are the doors. Circular stones, each weighing roughly 1,100 pounds, shaped like wheels, fitted to roll across tunnel openings. They could only be operated from the inside. At the center of each one was a small hole, wide enough to insert a spear, so that defenders could hold off anyone pushing from the other side. Conventional archaeology attributes the original construction of Derinkuyu to the Phrygian period, roughly between the 8th and 7th centuries BC, with significant expansion by Byzantine Christian communities between the 7th and 10th centuries AD. But that attribution is based on cultural context, not on any written records or identifiable artifacts found within the city itself. There are no inscriptions. There are no construction tools. There are no datable objects from the original excavated levels. The city appears to have been deliberately emptied and sealed before it was abandoned, leaving nothing behind that allows for precise dating. And the Phrygians, who documented other aspects of their culture and left material evidence at other sites, left nothing here. Cappadocia contains approximately 200 or more underground settlements, connected in some cases by tunnels stretching for miles between cities. The tunnel connecting Derinkuyu to the neighboring underground city of Kimakli, 6 miles away, has not yet been fully excavated. The combined population capacity of the regional underground system may have reached 60,000 people or more. And here is the question that no conventional explanation fully answers. What threat required 60,000 people to move underground at the same time? The Byzantine Arab invasions were real and documented, but they were episodic, not sustained enough to demand a city designed for extended habitation 280 feet underground, complete with wine production and livestock integration. The scale of Derinkuyu's design implies not a temporary shelter from a fleeting threat, but preparation for something longer, darker, and more total. We may never know what they were hiding from, but whoever built that ventilation system knew exactly what they were doing. And if an entire city carved 280 feet below the earth already defies the imagination, the next place we're visiting will show you that some ancient peoples went in the opposite direction entirely, building not beneath the ground, but above the ocean, raising an entire city on the waters of the Pacific with stones that no one has yet been able to explain how they were moved. Nanmadol, Micronesia. There is a place in the Pacific that most people have never heard of. A remote, humid mangrove coastline on the eastern edge of the island of Pohnpei in Micronesia that looks nothing like the site of one of the most ambitious construction projects in the ancient world. But if you step off the shore and look out at the shallow reef in front of you, you'll see something that makes no sense. A city. 92 artificial islands connected by a network of canals averaging 30 feet wide, covering roughly 7 square miles of ocean surface. The islands are built from interlocking basalt logs, natural hexagonal columns of volcanic rock stacked in a log cabin pattern, without mortar, without cement, without any binding material whatsoever. Just stone on stone, fitted together with a precision that has allowed the structure to withstand centuries of Pacific tides, winds, and storms. Welcome to Nanmadol, the city built on the ocean. The walls of the most sacred structure in the complex, the royal mausoleum known as Nandawas, stand 25 feet tall with a base 11 feet wide. Individual basalt columns weigh up to 50 tons. The total amount of stone used throughout the complex is estimated at 750,000 tons. and the nearest identified stone source sits on the opposite side of the island, separated from the construction site by roughly 19 miles of open ocean. No sheltered route, no internal channel, no path that avoids Pacific swells. No ancient transport vessel capable of carrying a 50-ton basalt log across open ocean has ever been identified, modeled, or demonstrated. Decades of excavation at Nan Madol have not produced a single construction tool, a materials preparation area, or evidence of the organizational infrastructure that any major ancient construction project typically leaves behind. Archaeologist William Ayres of the University of Oregon dated the earliest construction activity at the site to approximately 1 to 200 AD, with the main construction phase between 1200 and 1500 AD, based on carbon dating of organic material from the site. The builders are attributed to the Sodelur dynasty, a hierarchical political entity that supposedly ruled Pohnpei and demanded tribute labor from the island's entire population. Conventional archaeology argues that this organized workforce, operating over centuries, could have transported basalt columns around the island on large canoe platforms, building the complex incrementally, one stone at a time. The peoples of Micronesia were extraordinary navigators, the greatest open ocean sailors in human history, and their canoe technology was far more sophisticated than most outside observers assumed. But navigation and heavy cargo transport are entirely different engineering challenges. A large traditional canoe platform is optimized for speed and distance, not for the stable suspension of a 50-ton load on open ocean swells. A single rogue wave in the Pacific could destabilize any raft attempting to carry that mass, tipping it and losing the stone. And a 1,500-year construction period still requires, at every single step, the same unresolved physics of getting a 50-ton stone across 19 miles of open water. A study published in 2010 in the Journal of Island and Coastal Archaeology noted that despite decades of excavation, no construction tools, no evidence of a ramp system, and no preparation area had been identified at Nan Madol. The oral tradition of Pohnpei, recorded by ethnographers in the 19th century, attributes the construction to two brothers, Olisihpa and Olosopa, who came from a distant land and used sacred magic to levitate the stones into place. That is mythology, and should be read as mythology. But the same tradition appears in structurally similar forms at multiple megalithic sites on different continents, in cultures that had no contact with one another. The builders of Sacsayhuaman moved their stones by magic. The brothers of Nan Madol sang their stones into place. Whatever the original observation was that gave rise to these traditions, it was something that eyewitnesses could not explain in mechanical terms. Nan Madol was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2016 and simultaneously placed on the list of World Heritage in danger, due to encroaching mangroves and the complete absence of management and preservation. The city is disappearing. It may collapse back into the ocean it was built upon before anyone fully understands how it got there. 6 places, 6 mysteries. 6 times where the official historical record reaches a certain line and stops. What these 6 places share is not just mystery. It's a pattern, precision that defies the tools attributed to their builders, scales that go far beyond what we can demonstrate using the methods of the time, and in almost every case, a complete absence of the records, tools, and debris that should exist, but don't. Human history is not a clean line from primitive to sophisticated. Civilizations rise, advance to levels we can barely imagine, and vanish, taking their knowledge with them. The stones survive. The knowledge does not. Now I want to hear from you. Of the 6 places we explored today, which one surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments. Which ones did you already know about? And which ones had you never heard of before? And if you have your own theory about any of these places, I want to know. If this video made you think, made you question, made you want to dig deeper, then it did exactly what it was meant to do. Leave a like, because that's the simplest way to tell me the journey was worth it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell because the next explorations are on their way, and you won't want to miss them. If you made it this far, know this. You're not an ordinary viewer. You're an explorer. And explorers like you are the reason this channel exists. Thank you for staying. The past has not finished speaking. And as long as there are questions without answers, we will keep searching for them together. I'm Curious Chris, and I'll see you on the next adventure. See you on the next exploration.